And in some cases, a lot of firms just really aren't running their businesses like a business. Revenue is not necessarily the bellwether of success. Move the needle and say, you know what, we should maybe just try doing this one thing this year, over the next year, and see how that works out. Hiring, staffing issue is underneath it all because work should not come first. Find a way to pay your people more. Again, people want to, live and work. All of these things still tie into one of the core issues that the profession's having, which is finding and retaining, your talent. So what are you going to do to manage your workflow? You don't need to go through any kind of a rebrand. You just kind of need to reimagine and change the conversation about what an accountant is. The old ways aren't going to be sustainable. There's too many things that accountants, would do that are just commoditized or can be done, through automation. Accountants really just have a great opportunity now to kind of change the narrative of who they are.
Welcome to CPA Transformation Podcast, where innovation meets insight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Cronin, Chief Strategy Officer at ZenWork. Join me as we consider the forces revolutionizing the world of accountants, bookkeepers, and professional tax preparers. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions and invaluable insights brought to you by Tax 1099. To watch and listen to more episodes of the CPA Transformation Podcast, visit cpatransformation.com, or you can visit our YouTube channel at Tax 1099. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Welcome. This is Jeff Cronin, and today I'd like to welcome Seth Fineberg here to join us on the CPA Transformation Podcast. Seth is an experienced editor and seasoned business journalist with a passion for researching and delivering useful information about what makes a business tick. Comes in many forms, from news articles and features to thought leadership and content marketing. This has led him to where he is now, where he plans to head as an industry consultant to content strategist, focused on primarily on helping the advancement and success of the accounting profession as a whole, as opposed to individual firms. He's particularly keyed to business technology changes and trends in his field, as well as how businesses think about marketing information in their internal operations functions. He's written, edited, and researched content for audiences that really need it the most, and he's been integral in creation and the success of the accounting profession events, such as the Growth and Profitability event with Accounting Today and the Accounting Web Live Summit. Seth, welcome to the podcast. I'm happy to see you.
Thank you. And actually, it's interesting. That was in my bio because Growth and Profitability was actually their first event that they did about a decade or so ago. And then they sort of rebranded it, retooled it, and re-released it as the Firm Growth Forum, which I just returned from. It was last week in San Diego. And so have some insights to share based on that. It was a really very energetic event, lots of engagement, lots of folks like really willing to share where they're up to. And, the folks that go to conferences in general, you realize you get a subset of the profession there.
Yeah.
People who are really willing to, want to get out of their comfort zone and want to change and want to see what they need to do to move forward. And also just they, sort of need the capacity to do it, to go, all right, I'm going to leave my office and go, or leave my home, wherever I'm working from, and go and be physically at a conference. It's not, it's an investment, of capital, of time, of just your mental, wherewithal. It's not for everybody, for sure. But you definitely get, there's a ripple effect that kind of happens out of that. And that's sort of really where I like to sit, is that I want to put things out into the market. I have my ear to the ground all the time.
Yeah.
And I want to share what I know, with, the powers that be. And in the accounting profession, that's two solid forces. That is the accounting professionals themselves, meaning the folks that go to work every day as an enrolled agent, a bookkeeper, CPA. They're working at a firm, whether they own it or they run it, or they're part of one, or they are looking to sell to or through the profession, meaning the vendors, service providers in the space. To me, they're all part of the ecosystem of what makes the profession work.
Yeah, great. Well, that's great. And when you look at the engagement, so where we stand now recording, right? Next week is AICPA Engage. This will probably come. Yeah, you'll be there. This will probably come out after the event happens. But yeah, it's a big commitment of time. I mean, you were in San Diego last week. You're going to be in Vegas next week.
Vegas.
Yeah.
I get it, man. And from where I sit, and even when I was in the journalist seat, the editor seat, you just have to be present at these industry events, because you do get into these conversations with people who are making things happen, and who are they are running practices, or selling to or through them, and you need to just touch base. And outside of just me, you need to have that connection, that FaceTime, that real one-on-one experience with someone who's maybe doing things that you were thinking about doing, or you even just sharing your own experiences. Humans just learn from other humans, and we're the profession as a whole. I mean, as long as I've been covering it, I've seen a couple of points of inflection, and we're definitely there, like right now, and really the last few years, particularly coming out of the pandemic, which affected businesses and individuals on the whole, but accounting professionals in particular, who really work on the value of their time and the things that they do. It's really given them pause on how they just run their business. And in some cases, a lot of firms just really aren't running their businesses like a business. They haven't been. They're not structured that way. They're just, they take in client work as they get it, usually through referral, and they clients that they've worked with for years, and they just rely on that annuity of just year in, year out, doing pretty much the same thing. I think it's time for the overall model to kind of maybe go through a bit of a reboot, and that's can be a little scary. So getting out and among your people is a great way to just get some confidence, get some insights, and really just feel like either, hey, I'm great where I'm at, or yeah, I'm gonna do some uncomfortable things over the next few years.
So when you think about strategies for doing that, right? I mean, learning best practices, you sort of have to think about how you engage your community.
Absolutely.
Do you have any sort of best practices or recommendations for folks listening about, hey, here's the best way to go ahead and even ideate, right? They may not even know what they don't know about how they operate.
Well, look, I've been kind of talking around it, but definitely getting out amongst your peers, I think, is a good way to get started. To, like, if you're just not feeling like I can even ideate on any of these things, just listen, get out and listen, or listen to like the multitude of podcasts that are out there. Consume content, and I consider live events content. I'm in this point in my career. That's a lot of what I'm trying to do, is play a role in the content that's out there. I did that for years as an editor. It was a big part of the business model at Accounting Web, where I ran the U.S. team over here, and a big part of our business model was not reporting on what's going on and not just churning things out, like throwing things back at you, but it was generating real thought leadership and content that was practical and useful and engaging. We did that in a multitude of forums. And in our final year, we put on a live event of our own. We felt it was time. It was a bit risky, a bit uncomfortable. It was really right on the heels of the pandemic, where people are just barely feeling comfortable, doing that and being social again. And we tried to do that in, I guess, the most mindful way. Mm-hmm. We checked a lot of boxes there, and we felt like we were onto something. Unfortunately, the folks who know Accounting Web know that it had to close in 2022 for a multitude of reasons, very few of which were really like in our control. We were owned by a parent company over in the UK, and it was just a difficult decision that they had to make. But what it did, and I mentioned the ripple effect, early on, it did put that ripple effect out in the market that said, hey, the profession is ready for something new. They're ready for new events and new kinds of thinking and new voices, or maybe some of the same voices to say, trusted voices to say really what's going on now. And, that events could really, do well, and people could find, a place for themselves. And that was something that I think we put out into the market. And so that, to answer your question, yeah, that's sort of one way. But so consuming the right content, and then, also just listening to your team, like really looking at how things are. You might be looking at your firm and being like, man, we made more money last year than we did in any of the previous years that I could think of. Accounting profession, look at the numbers. Firms, by and large, are doing great. Why change? Well, it's a very, very good question. But I would press you to look underneath those numbers. Like, revenue is not necessarily the bellwether of success. And it's also, you have to feel like, can we sustain this? What are we doing to sustain that? Are we still working our people a really uncomfortable amount of hours? Has that changed? Are your people pretty satisfied where they're at? Because, you could be doing great and company can show, year on year revenue growth, but, your people aren't necessarily engaged or happy, or, maybe you have some clients leaving too. Like, there's a lot of things underneath all of that you need to take a hard look at. And then, look at your own sustainability. Like, are we, the path that we're on, can we sustain over the next few years? Do we have a partner that's been here for a while and that's leaving? Do we have our own succession plans? All these questions, not saying you have to answer them all in one sitting, but they're definitely, look at your own business models too. Are we on the right path? Like, can we sustain where we're at? Should we be adding services, cutting back on clients, increasing fees for certain things? All of these things that really force the profession into an uncomfortable place of, and I know I use that term a lot, but it is.
Yeah.
It doesn't last. But initially it is. Just like when you're jumping into a pool for the first time that you don't really know. You want to get in there, it's real hot outside. You're like, man, the pool's going to feel great, but it's cold. And there's that initial shock of like, oh my God, I want to get out. But then you settle in and it's like, oh wait, it's actually not that bad. But that initial shock is like that uncomfortableness that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You kind of have to live in it for a little bit to kind of move the needle and say, you know what, we should maybe just try doing this one thing this year over the next year and see how that works out. I'm hearing people talk about this. Let's give it a try.
I'm going to jump back to something you brought up.
Sorry, kind of a long-winded answer, but I do that.
Not a problem. Something that's actually, it's, funny, this season of the podcast, there's been a recurring theme about burnout and work-life balance at firms. Mm-hmm. My guess is this is somewhat related to the challenge with hiring in firms and the fact that there's such a staffing shortage.
Yeah. It's all connected, my friend.
Yeah.
It's all connected. Hiring, staffing issue is underneath it all. You touched on the first point, and I'm putting this out into the market pretty regularly because I picked it up at an event I was at last year, and I want to keep saying it this way. And I think it needs, words matter. Mm-hmm. And so we no longer are calling it work-life balance. Why? Because work should not come first. Life comes first. How you feel, how you are, how you feel like, okay, like I can really kick butt at work and the things that I do, but there's a limit, there's a stopping point where I do not take client calls, I do not answer emails, I do not work past a certain amount of hours in a week, and I have other things going on in my life that bring me joy. And that is what is going to sustain this profession. And actually, students, younger accounting professionals who are coming in and want to have a career here too, it's essential that they know that this is a priority for them. And that's just one. I would also say salaries absolutely need to change. Find a way to pay your people more, whatever it is. And again, back to the business model thing. Maybe you need to figure out like, okay, yeah, we need to be bringing in X in order to pay our people Y, especially out of the gate. That jumping in, that's not just starting salaries, but even at kind of an associate level, like where you're there for a few years, several years, it's not changing enough compared to other professional service careers. And young professionals know this. They don't want pizza parties. They would rather get that $3,000 bonus at the end of the month or the end of the year. I'm serious.
Yeah.
This is all these things have to be a priority. And third, I think too, is you can't just check the box when it comes to diversity and inclusion. This is something that people need to look around the firm and look at clients that they work with and feel like, yep, this is actually a reflection of the world that I live in. And it might not seem like a big deal right now to you, but man, I remember when I first started covering the profession 22 odd years ago or so. AICPA had, they have tons of numbers and facts on the CPA profession, but CPAs, by and large, firm leadership was maybe 2% female.
Yeah.
2%. That has changed considerably, and then there's still a lot of work to do. But that's just one, kind of, other group. Again, people want to, live and work, work in a profession that really reflects the world around them, and it's just not white and male. It's not.
Yeah.
So let's, make that a priority. So all of these things still tie into one of the core issues that the profession's having, which is finding and retaining, your talent.
Yeah, I would say I'd reflect the same thing, right? I mean, I've been working with accountants for 35 years professionally, and
okay.
So
yeah,
I've seen the whole thing.
These different stages,
yeah,
just how firms are structured and things like that, and the arrow was the value. Your partner would go, the managing partners, the lead partners would be looking at the staff and just be like, all right,
how many hours did they bill?
It didn't matter. It didn't matter the quality of work that you didn't matter how on top of the work you were. How many hours did you do?
Yeah, I mean that's
gotta go away.
How does that? So I guess right. It's great to say that. I guess this is the question about especially in the work that Zenwork helps with, which is tax season stuff, right? Because there's just so much seasonality in those things.
There is, but it. This is a plan. You know what it is. It doesn't change every year.
Fair enough.
So the IRS deadlines can be what they are. What are your deadlines? You can control that. Accountants haven't, this is starting to change. I mean, just based on, the conversations that I have, there are, enrolled agents who are steeped in tax every year, CPAs to a degree, steeped in tax, bookkeepers, of course, but the folks who are dealing directly with the tax prep side of the business, it has to still be done. There are less people to do it these days, but you can still say no. You can say, this is my deadline. This is when I need things. When it is every year. The pandemic obviously drove people over the edge because it was what they dubbed so politely as March-ternity, where it did not end. And for a lot of folks, they realized, wow, actually my busy time, my things that I'm dealing with tax kind of don't end throughout the year. That's a problem, and it's one that you can control to a point. Again, IRS, the governing bodies that be, they have their deadlines of when things are supposed to be filed by. That. It year in and year out. It changes very little on the whole. So what are you going to do to manage your workflow? That's the challenge. That's one of the uncomfortable things that I think firms have to come to grips with, firm leaders in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you went on to talk a little bit about diversity in the profession. When you look at that in the context of this overload of work, frankly, as you mentioned already, the whole problem with recruiting and retention. How does that become something, I guess when you look at the evolution of that within the profession, how have attitudes really changed about diversity? I mean, is this something that's been a natural outcome, or is this something that's being driven?
Like I said, I think it's just look around you, look at the world that you live in, and feel like, yeah, we're sort of reflective of that. It just, it matters,
Mm-hmm.
particularly, for folks who want to come in to, a profession, or, work in a, professional service environment. I think that matters to them. You have to meet people, and I'm all about this, when it comes to all of the three core things that I mentioned. You have to meet your people where they are. You have to really know what is important to them. And, recent surveys have come out, and they're going to continue to come out on what matters most. And
Yeah.
it's at the top of the list, my friend.
Hmm. Yeah. So I mean, do you think that that's really historically, has that been intentional on the part or is
I
this just a reflection of society? Have we
I
just
think
come
it's a
along?
reflection of society. That's what I said. It's like
Yeah.
it's this natural, like, hey, this is kind of what matters
Hmm.
now. And a lot of things, I guess, didn't, because they weren't discussed, or they weren't, things were just kind of accepted as is. You know, um, you can go all the way back to civil rights movement. It's
Yeah.
just, people just had enough of it being the same. It's like, well, okay, you're benefiting, I'm not. What's wrong? What's wrong with me? I have something of value to give, and because of my background, the color of my skin, or my gender, whatever it is, they somehow were other,
Right.
lesser, and that, I think, has been a progressive change over decades, and it's going to continue to be that way because of, definitely in this country for sure. I mean, we are a conglomeration of everywhere in the world. That's just how we've always been. And so, yeah, so, again, it's a reflection of just the society that we live in. And it just has to be like, it can't just be like this club of, no, you're this. And
Right.
that's all. That's what an accountant is. I think, and this is something that came up at I wanted to bring this up, something at the conference that I just came from. There was a discussion about, like, oh, well, accountants, just even just looking at the work that we do and how it's evolving into this more advisory type of, thing. Like, accounting isn't even what we do anymore, and should we even be called accountants anymore? And I stood up and said, for one, yes, you don't need to go through any kind of a rebrand. You just kind of need to reimagine, and change the conversation about what an accountant is. It's happened throughout time.
Yeah.
Even the cities that we live in. You're still in Minneapolis, I'm still in New York, but what it is has always changed. It's still that brand, it's still that name, but it's, things just redefine themselves, over time. And I think this profession, I mentioned the point of inflection. I think that's where we're at right now. It has an opportunity. Every individual who calls themselves an accounting professional has the opportunity to change the narrative.
Right. When you in the conversation around that transition, I mean, I guess you mentioned about the being in San Diego this week and some things that you learned, which maybe we can talk about a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, so we have an issue with balance. We have, or maybe an opportunity is a better way. Let's you know every issue is an opportunity, right? We have an opportunity with balance. We have an opportunity with expansion of diversity inclusion, and you
Yes.
briefly touched on a third one, which is compensation.
Salary,
Yeah.
compensation.
Um,
I think it's just a matter of, like, again, looking at your own business structure.
yeah.
If the excuse is, well, we haven't been able, we can't really, afford it, and we'll be priced out, and what have you. I would say look at your overall business structure. Maybe there's a way to do it. Maybe you're like, hey, we're too reliant on volume work.
Right.
Maybe it should be higher value than volume, and you will be able to, charge more for higher value things that you do. And somebody even brought up the idea of like, okay, that sounds great, but what if like everyone's gonna, get to the point of where everyone's just basically doing, what every other accountant is doing? Then you start to look at, and for one, especially right now, or at least in the foreseeable future, I don't see that happening. There's too few really doing, next level things. But I think it's, like I said at the beginning, you have to sort of look at your overall business structure, and you can see what you're really best at. Maybe you're specialized. You look at your client base; they're mostly restaurants. Like, hey, we're really good at that, or law firms, or
Yeah.
I don't know, nonprofits, whatever it is. Like, you just become that person. That's your brand now. You're the accountant for this. Opportunities are wide open right now.
I think this is going to get back. We're going to mix the money thing together into running your accounting firm as a business, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's really, that's the undercurrent here. It's, you have to really start thinking about, okay, like, who are we and how are we going to do things? You want revenue to grow year on year? How are we going to do it? Because the old ways aren't going to be sustainable. There's too many things that accountants, would do that are just commoditized or can be done, through automation.
Yeah.
But that's been for a while now. That's technically nothing new. The thing that's new is the new types of automation that are coming into the space.
Right.
AI, of course, is really the next level, but that's really all it is. We had a lot of the same sort of fretful conversations that I remember, a dozen years ago about cloud.
Yeah.
Cloud applications, cloud technologies. And even before that, you probably remember, when desktop was like, okay, well, we're moving to desktop. What do you mean? Like, we got to do things on a computer now? Like, well, we're so used to doing it in this ledger and in this way. And then we send things out to a, a processing center. And this is how we do it.
Right.
What do you mean we're not doing it anymore? What do you mean I'm not gonna have to pay for storage space anymore because I'm getting rid of all the paper?
Yeah, that's
that
transition
is tough.
Yeah, that transition
it's tough.
The when you look at I was a guest this week. It'll come out later in the summer. It's a podcast specifically accountants for legal firms. It's the legal accountant podcast, and
okay.
When you look at verticals like that, is that the way? I mean, I guess maybe the answer is one way, but I mean, when you look at ways that you can see an improvement in your differentiation. So I'm going to speak as a marketer for a second.
Yeah.
I sell a product that is fundamentally
all about marketing. What we're talking about, like how you're putting yourself out there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fundamentally a commodity. I produce tax forms and file them with the IRS. Everybody who does what I do can do that, or they stop existing. And the same is be true for accounting. Like, everybody can do basic bookkeeping, or they don't exist.
Right.
How do you recommend people think about their businesses to think about how they're different?
Well, a lot of those things are, can just be, the service, the level of service to start with. You can always differentiate on service.
Yeah.
But those things that we're talking about, these are the things that are going to become, less valuable to do, or they're going to be, it's going to be difficult to kind of like, charge very much to do, some of those basic things. I think, once you start maybe thinking from, tax prep to tax planning and review, and, even in the audit space too, like there's a lot of opportunity there too for, the CPAs who, are really like, well, I don't want to, sort of, get rid of the audit. It's a good annuity for us, and like we're really good at it. We've got talented people that do these things. So all these things are an opportunity to to have conversations. So when you start talking about things like advisory, that's all that it actually means. It means you are communicating more regularly with your clients, who are the other human at the end of the email or at the end of the Zoom or the call, and you're physically there for them on a regular or a more regular basis, then they see the human that you are. That's how you differentiate. You want to talk about marketing. I mean, that sells, um, around the block. I mean, why did something like, I mean, it's hard to compare, but, something like Amazon, which at one point people are like, I don't even
buy books online.
I'm just learning my computer here. I'm like, so many people like got online in the 90s, through AOL and CompuServe and some of these other services that they were just kind of wading their feet into the internet. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I'm going to give you my credit card and I'm going to buy things. And a true story, I actually, at one point in my career, I was covering venture capital, and it was covering a lot of the flow of money that was going into the tech space, into, pharmaceutical and other areas of investment. Tech was one of my areas that I covered. And so I got to interview Jeff Bezos back when they were just still getting venture money. And it was their last big round before they became the big, public, before they went public. They still weren't even when they went public, they still didn't even turn a profit for many years.
Yeah.
As people might know in their story, but they were still just selling books and they were just starting to move into music. And I was like, Jeff, like, I got to ask you, man, like what, just pretty much what I just said. Like, how are you getting people to sort of trust, like, how are you going to make a business out of this, long term? And he said, that's not what we're doing. He's like, we're actually redefining the customer experience. He said, that's going to be our value. So people are going to keep coming to us the way that they came to a mall or to a store, because of the level of service that they get.
That's great.
And he did, and that's
exactly
absolutely what they continued to do.
Yeah.
However, many decades later, it's the only reason why they remain in the game that they are with serious competition, left and right. Say what you will about their business practices or what have you, but they're not this multi-billion-dollar company for nothing. They're people made the decision, like, I'm going to choose Amazon because it's super convenient and I get a lot of service. Walmart too. Walmart, big chain brick and mortar store, really in some ways shouldn't exist. Malls are closing left and right.
Yeah.
Malls of America will never close, by the way. Because people, I've been, it should never close. But because it's an experience, though.
Yeah.
But your basic strip mall, your basic sort of, local area mall, like they're kind of dying out because they haven't, evolved. They can't really compete. But something like Walmart can, because service and price too, sure. But it's convenient. They have pretty much what people want and at a price level that they want, but they're also getting a level of service there that they just feel like I can keep going here.
So what you're saying is, if you have a firm today that you need to differentiate your service somehow, or you'll turn into a strip mall.
It just needs to be a priority. Well,
yeah.
We're talking about things that are getting commoditized, or things that just are like everyone's doing, and what's going to differentiate yourself. So yeah, on service, on the types of service, the higher value things, accountants really just have a great opportunity now to kind of change the narrative of who they are.
So that's great. If you look at where we sit today, as we come up, maybe a little bit about what what interesting things came out of San Diego, and let's what is it that you saw that was sort of top of mind for you after that trip last week?
There was definitely a lot of questions about just the whole business model thing, and just really just defining what it is to be an accountant. Look, the whole theme of the event itself, it's the firm growth forum. Mm-hmm. So everyone who was there was by and large a CPA, or there's a handful of enrolled agents there, but they were growth minded. They went to hear about growth strategies. We haven't even gotten into the private equity discussion yet. Mm-hmm. But there was private equity in the room.
Sure.
which to me, just in my experience, is a bit troubling. I understand that, the attraction of private equity in the accounting space, as sort of a means to an end. For some, it's like, hey, if you want to go and acquire, if you want to, grow into other areas, or maybe bring in other services like, wealth management. I'm starting to see that. I've seen accounting firms who buy wealth management firms, or they, want to have other things that diversify them. It's when you've got capital behind you, you got some millions that can say, hey, no problem, we can get you this, we can get you to this level. Hard to say no. But what you're doing, you are giving up a certain amount of control. This is just how private equity works. Eventually, they end up taking control over things. They end up firing people. They end up doing things that maybe you hadn't envisioned for your accounting business. They're not as concerned with the relationships. They don't really necessarily know the dynamics of being an accountant and being in the accounting space like you do. So anyway, that came up quite a bunch too, because of the nature of what the event was, and who was there, and what the theme again was all about growth. No one was going to the firm growth forum to stay where they're at.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up. I mean, I guess let's generalize the idea of the private equity folks being there to talk about exiting. Traditionally you've exited your practice,
exiting or just expanding, growing. But ultimately for them it is. It's all return on investment.
Right.
Whereas they don't care about the return on the relationships.
Yeah.
There.
Well, what I'm thinking about is if I'm our age as an accountant in a firm, I'm staring at 10 years saying, hey, I want to retire at some point. So what are my ways? I think it's bring it full circle around. I started my firm. I grew my firm.
A lot of them don't have succession plans. Necessarily.
I don't have if I don't have a succession plan in place historically. Even if I did have one, I've got an associate that's teed up to maybe transition ownership shares.
Right. Well, that's a succession plan now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just all right. Sell or merge. It's well, okay, who am I passing the keys to too?
Yeah. When you look at the seller merge question, I think that, the interesting conversation you have about running it as a business. So, right. Spent my career in technology companies, predominantly serving accounting and legal, frankly. Mm-hmm. And, the conversation around, at some point the time comes that you sell or you merge, or at some point ownership transitions.
Figure out where do I go out, or like I'm just I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to retire, semi-retire, move on to something else.
And current investors are ready to be out if you've taken outside money in growth. And as that starts to come, if it is is that coming for accounting? It's come for hospitals. It's come for retail. It's come for.
I think it's already. This is why. I think it's here. I hate to be negative about it, but I think the sharks are circling, and I'm concerned about this profession that I've come to really admire and care about, and in my way serve. I want to see it grow and progress in its own way, and not by someone else's agenda. But that's just my point of view. I don't own a firm. I've never owned a firm. I don't, I run my business, these days. And, I know that if I were to take some investment that would help me to get to another place, I'd have to give it a real consideration. But, I also, at this point, especially as a firm owner, I would think, well, I do like some of the control that I have over my destiny.
Yeah.
But if that kind of thing isn't as important to you, and, I think some folks really need to, we didn't talk about this, but taking a hard kind of existential look at why you got into this business to begin with. Is it still the same? Do you still have the same reasons? Obviously if you're getting in sometime in your 20s and you're now in your 50s, those reasons might have changed, and
Right.
that, might affect some of your decisions. Life happens. You might have some sick relatives, or you might just be like, what, I'm ready to physically move from where I am. I want to be in another place in my life. And you have some hard decisions to make, or, do you really care about what you've grown and built over, in some case, decades? And is there, some legacy you wanna leave there and have some say in that legacy?
Yeah.
These are definitely questions that I think firm leaders are kind of coming to terms. And also, what's the value of what I built?
Yeah.
That's the whole other thing too.
How do I know what it's worth? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
For sure.
Seth, one, thank you. It's been interesting. If you think about you take a very human approach to thinking about the accounting firm, which or our industry, which I think I really appreciate.
Thank you. I mean, I try to look at things in that lens, because to me, it's the most obvious lens to look through. But I think it's been an issue. Like, accountants just see themselves as, professional X or Y, or, some other letter. You're still you. You're Jeff. I'm Seth. I know the brand of me, and I know what I put out in the market. And I think people who are willing to pay you money and their time and their trust, like, they want to know that human. And maybe it's time to kind of break that shell a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so where can everybody
just some thoughts?
Yeah. Where can everybody find you if they're looking to connect with you?
I can make it very easy. I own the domain sethfineberg.com. So come see me there. It's pretty much like my, kind of digital business card.
Right.
You get to know a bit about my background. I put up new content pretty regularly. I have a weekly newsletter called the Fineberg Review, which you can subscribe to. It's free. It is also distributed fairly regularly through my partnership with CPA Trendlines. The publisher there happens to be a personal friend, and he enjoys what I do. So if you are a subscriber to CPA Trendlines, you will or have been regularly getting the Fineberg Review. But if you don't, you can sign up just through me on my website. I'm also all over LinkedIn pretty regularly, and Twitter X, whatever you want to call it these days. It's still Twitter to me.
Same here.
I don't care. I came up with it, whatever. So you find me there. I'm occasionally sharing some things through that. And and then, I'm going to be out and about. It's conference season, so you'll be able to find me. Engage, I know, is a little difficult. You have like 5,000 people that go to this thing. So I am going to be there. If you happen to see me wandering around the area, grab me, say hi. Also, I am on the advisory committee for the Firm Growth Forum in July. That is an event put on by the Trimeric Group.
Yeah.
And that's Randy Crabtree and his
Randy's been a guest on the
cohorts.
podcast already, actually. So
okay. Randy's an amazing human being, and he is also equally as passionate about seeing this profession do the right things, do the better things. He wants to see accountants. While he's a CPA, he knows that CPAs are only just a portion of the accounting profession.
Yeah.
But he wants to see all accountants rise, and so he has the Bridging the Gap conference, because let's face it, we are at that point, as we've been talking about, where some gaps need bridging.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really a conference about you, the human accounting professional, and how can things be better for you. He focuses a lot on mental health.
Yeah.
A lot on that sort of life work balance that we talked about, and just being better at what you do, getting comfortable with technology, getting comfortable with new processes and things like that, and just being the best human and accounting professional you can be. So I'll be there, and probably several other events, going into the summer and even the fall. ZeroCon, BotKeeper, probably QB Connect in the fall.
Sure.
When that happens, I'm hearing that'll probably be like maybe late October,
early November.
This year. Yeah, early November, late October, something like that. They haven't quite announced it yet, but I guess they like to keep things, mystery for a bit. But I know that they're working on things over there, so I'll be out.
Great.
But yeah, I mean, please reach out. I love having, I have just a few meetings this afternoon that are just people who found me and they want to have conversations with me. And, this is how I learn. I only know what I know through you. I want to hear your stories. I want to see how I can help or some of the things that I should be doing. And if I can help you in any way, I most certainly will.
Well, Seth, thanks a lot for your time. And I'm certain I'll see you out there at one of the events that you just mentioned over the next couple of months during event season.
Yeah.
And everybody, if you're looking for Seth, go to sethfineberg.com. You can find him. It will include some links to the things that he mentioned in the description of the video as well, so you can find it more easily. Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. You can visit our website, cpatransformation.com, or visit our channel on YouTube at tax1099.com for more episodes, clips, and discussions with industry leaders.